So recently I got this new job, and with the new job, you meet new people, you get different, I guess, like views, points of views and stuff like that from people that you're working with. And, I just started training for the job, and there's a guy that we're working with, that I'm being trained with, right? And other people I'm being trained with. And I can't remember how we got on the topic exactly, but we were talking about when it comes to maybe raising children, I guess boys specifically. And this guy, he actually does have a child on the way. He's actually around my age, 21, and he has a child on the way. He has a son that is on the way. And his way of thinking to raise a son in terms of the aspect of attraction, sexuality, things like that, like how this boy is going to view the world as he gets older. His point of view was it was kind of displeasing. So from his point, he was saying like how when it comes to the way we are bringing up children and the way the media that is geared towards children or advertised towards children and what it's trying to expose and show to kids nowadays is trying to kind of bring up children in a way to where they know a lot about different types of attractions and sexualities and stuff like that. And honestly, I agreed with that point, that I feel like that is going on too much, right? That kids, as young as they are, the concept of sexuality in different, genders or something like that, that's a concept that shouldn't even be like, like it should be foreign to them. They should be focused on being a kid, learning their ABC, stuff like that, right? Not kind of like gender politics or just, just a bunch of different things, right? So like we have stuff like people who are drag queens reading to elementary kids in school. We have even stuff like drag queens twerking and stuff like that.
How does anybody in this room know how to twerk? That's all it is. And then you just move your bum up and down like that, and that's twerking.
We have like TV shows or cartoons where they have all of these like different types of characters that I guess would represent the LGBT, different parts of the LGBTQ community. Now I feel like there's nothing wrong with, I guess, letting the kids know that, okay, these types of things exist, but having it in a way that seems as if it's trying to push things, I feel like that's not the way to go about it, right? So that's the point he was making. I agreed with that. But, his way of thinking was like, well, this stuff being shown to my son is going to make him gay or something like that. It's going to automatically make him gay, right? And sure, I think a lot of things kids have, they're influenced very easily. And by showing them things, anything, and if they somehow think it's somewhat interesting, they're going to try and emulate that thing, right? When I was a kid, I wanted to be Spider-Man or the Hulk. I would say that I am Hulk, I am Spider-Man, but my parents, they didn't make me they didn't inject me with like some super serum or something like that to make me Spider-Man or to make me the Hulk. No, they're just like, oh, cool, here's a costume, or oh, really, you're Spider-Man? They're not gonna be like, oh man, we really gotta make sure this kid, because like let's say a kid is like wanting to be trans and they're like 8 years old. How can they even understand that aspect of themselves to make that type of decision, right? And obviously most kids, they can't even try and really process, their own gender or even their own sexuality. They barely even see a difference in between these things. And so for a kid to think that they're in the mindset to make a decision like that at such an early age, it's not a proper way of thinking. And so the guy at my job, right, the way he wanted to combat this was kind of almost like fighting fire with fire, right? He wanted to kind of like the way sexuality is kind of like has been introduced heavily into children's media. He wanted to do the same, but with, I guess, straightness per se, and doing things like encouraging his son to, look at women, when he's like, he made an example, like let's say he's out in public with his son walking down the street and there's a woman who has a big butt. He's gonna be like, hey son, look at that butt right there, look at that. Like, that's weird, bro. That's so weird. And then there's this rapper named Boosie, and he thought that what Boosie did to his son, like I think his son was turning 14, and he got like strippers for his son to start twerking on his son and stuff like that. And he thought that that was like a good idea, although that is very illegal. He thought that like, well, you know, if it wasn't illegal, that'd be a good thing to do. That would make sure he's straight. No, what's gonna happen is that, sure, maybe he's gonna be straight, but he's not gonna be able to look at women or even people in a way as if they're humans. He's only gonna see them for their body parts, right? When you teach them that young to be hypersexual, to over sexualize the people around them, then they cannot possibly form proper relationships, right? It's just the same when a kid is introduced to porn at a young age, right? I was introduced to porn when I was really young. I think whenever the moment I had free internet access with no restrictions, and that kind of led to me looking at the world really differently. At least when I grew up, right? Of course, now things have shifted, things have changed. I've realized that I have these types of problems, but I kind of went on this problem. This problem kind of became a thing on my own. It wasn't being reinforced by a parent, right? My father wasn't teaching me these types of things, but the fact that this guy wants to go on and teach his son these types of things, I think it's abhorrent. I think it's disgusting. I think it's cruel. I think it robs that child of their innocence, because children shouldn't worry about that type of stuff, right? Children shouldn't be thinking about like, oh no, man, I hope I'm not gonna be gay when I get older or something like that. Like it doesn't make any sense, right? So he saw that I was disagreeing with him, and then the other people that we were being trained with, which were mostly girls, they were actually all girls, right? And so he was thinking like, well, of course they're not gonna agree with me. And then he went to me like, you see what I'm saying, right? I'm like, nah, man, I don't hear a word of what you're saying, bro. I'm not agreeing with you at all. And then he's like, well, let me get some other guys' opinions, right? He went over to a group of guys that were also being trained as well. We had like some free time. That's why we were able to talk freely like this. And he discussed the whole situation. He brought up the whole example of being in public with them, like with a child, with his son, and like, pointing out an attractive woman. And he also brought up the example that rapper Boosie did with his son, right? And they agreed. They agreed with him and his point of view of things, right? Now that right there, just kind of like, it was disheartening to hear like, dang, man, how in the world can they really agree with that method, right? Because all you're doing is fighting hypersexuality with hypersexuality, right? Imagine that backfires, and the result of that backfiring can be kind of like this kid not really wanting to achieve anything else in life besides the pursuit of getting more women. Just think about like when you were a kid or any other kid, at some point in their life, they're going to find something and they're going to get really dedicated to it. And what's going to help them become dedicated to it is through their parents supporting them, right? Imagine a kid gets really into martial arts and their parents are like, you're doing really well. You're doing really well. We love that you're doing this. You're looking awesome, whatever. That kid is going to be encouraged to keep doing that probably all the way up until adulthood, right? And when you're encouraging a kid to kind of feed into these hypersexual fantasies, all it's going to do is just results in a mind that can only think and process things in such a manner, right? So it's like, why raise your kid up to try and be a player, like kind of like that, right? Instead of raising your kid up to be like really smart, maybe really athletic, maybe really compassionate and giving. You can get kids to do so many things, so why not kind of get your kid into things that are good, things that are going to be good for them, encourage them to live a more positive life, right? A life that you probably weren't able to live, right? And then he brought up how when it comes to, I guess, the expectations of men and women, at least here in the West, and this is literally only Western ideology. My father, who grew up in Africa, he did not grow up with this type of mindset. Most probably other African and Asian countries didn't grow up with this type of mindset unless they're Westernized. It's almost expected of a man to kind of lose his virginity, let's say, at a certain age and have some type of experience, but it would be preferred more so of a woman to have little to no type of sexual experience whatsoever. And that is, for one, a double standard, right? And two, it's like, well, why do you have to raise your kid with that way of thinking? Why do you have to feel like, your kid is going to be a punk, or your kid is going to be inferior because he hasn't done X sexual thing at a certain age, right? That's so weird. It's like, when you be more worried about if your kid is doing good in his studies, like, why is it concerning you that your kid isn't really making some type of sexual advancements, once he's a certain age in high school, right? That shouldn't be something that should worry you. In fact, the fact that he's not worried about that he's not thinking about that, should be an encouraging thing, because that means that he hopefully has his focus on something else that'll probably benefit him and, his future family in the long run, right? And if you see that your children are picking up certain things or learning certain things in school, you teach them, you foster an environment where they're open to you and they're honest to you, and they want to talk to you about things that they heard about and that they learned. And you tell them like what you think about it with their opinion. You ask them what do they think about it, what's their opinion, and things like that. And you also want to lead by example, right? Like, if you are not a strong enough and present enough father figure in your child's life, then then your son might grow up and be influenced by a bunch of things and develop in a way that you might find unfavorable, right? Or they might get into certain phases in their life, right? So like, if you're not a good, consistent father who treats the mother of that child well, whether that be I don't know, your baby mama or your wife, preferably your wife, I would say, then that kid isn't going to know how to actually properly treat women, right? For one, the guy's already thinking about taking his kid out and being like, hey, look at that butt right there, look at that butt, whilst he's, together with that kid's mother. And he's like, well, I guess it's normal for me to look at other women whilst I'm also in a committed relationship. I guess it's also normal for me to want to still chase other women and stuff like that when I feel like I'm in a committed relationship, or to maybe not even settle down, and it was very sad. It was disheartening to see that other guys kind of agreed with that way of thinking, young men too, and my skin color too. That just kind of like, it was disheartening, maybe that's not everybody, and I hope it's not everybody, but I just don't want a generation of young men who are just thinking with their body part downstairs and not with their brain up here. Making every decision in an impulsive one instead of something that you think about deeply and that you really consider things, right? So yeah, that's about it. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. See you guys in the next one, and check out my latest videos and things like that if you enjoyed the channel. Peace out.